Act 1. An American Heartland Nightmare. In the heartland of America, nestled amongst the rolling cornfields of Iowa, there existed a town called Villisca. In the year 1912, it was the very picture of rural tranquility. A small, peaceful community of about 2,000 souls, bound together by church, family, and hard work. It was a town where doors were left unlocked, where children played freely in the streets until dusk, and where the greatest disturbance was the whistle of a passing train. It was the kind of place where nothing truly terrible ever seemed to happen, until one night, when a monstrous evil crept into the town, shattering its peace forever and leaving a bloody stain on American history that would never be washed away. At the center of our story is the Moore family. Josiah B. Moore was one of Villisca's most prominent businessmen. A successful and well-respected man, he owned the local farm implement store. He and his wife, Sarah, were deeply involved in their community, particularly the local Presbyterian church. They had 4 beautiful children who were the light of their lives: 11-year-old Herman, 10-year-old Catherine, 7-year-old Boyd, and the youngest, 5-year-old Paul. They were, by all accounts, the quintessential American family, living a comfortable and happy life. Our story begins on the warm, pleasant evening of June 9th, 1912. The entire town was abuzz with the annual Children's Day program at the Presbyterian Church, an event eagerly anticipated by all. Sarah Moore was the co-director of the program, and her children were all performing. After a successful and joyous evening of songs and recitations, the Moore family walked home around 9:30 p.m. Accompanying them were 2 young friends of their daughter Catherine, Lena and Ina Stillinger, aged 12 and 8. They were staying the night, a common and innocent sleepover. The group was seen walking home, happy and cheerful, under the moonlit Iowa sky. They entered their simple white frame house, locked the door behind them, and prepared for bed, completely unaware that for all 8 people inside, it would be their final night on Earth. The next morning, on June 10th, the sun rose over a strangely silent Moore residence. Mary Peckham, their next-door neighbor, was the first to notice something was wrong. The house, usually bustling with the noise of 4 young children by this time, was unnaturally still. The curtains were all drawn, and no one had come out to do the morning chores. After her repeated knocks on the door went unanswered, a deep sense of dread began to set in. Around 8 a.m., she called Josiah's brother, Ross Moore. Ross arrived, a spare set of house keys in his hand. He tried to peer through a window, but saw nothing. He knocked loudly, calling out his brother's name. There was only silence. With a growing knot of fear in his stomach, he unlocked the front door and stepped inside. He first checked the downstairs parlor, finding nothing amiss. He then moved towards the stairs. As he ascended to the second floor, a grim scene began to unfold. He opened the door to the bedroom where the 2 visiting Stillinger girls were staying. What he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. 2 small figures lay in bed, surrounded by blood-soaked sheets. A bloodied axe lay on the floor beside them. Horrified, Ross ran back outside, screaming for Mary Peckham to call the town marshal. The nightmare had begun. The news spread through Villisca like a plague, and within an hour, the quiet, peaceful town had been transformed into a scene of mass hysteria and horror. The evil that was never supposed to happen here had arrived in the most brutal way imaginable. Act 2. The House of Covered Mirrors. Before any semblance of a professional investigation could begin, the Moore house became a spectacle of public horror. The town marshal, Hank Horton, arrived, but he was quickly overwhelmed. Dozens, and soon hundreds, of morbidly curious townspeople descended upon the property. They trampled through the yard, peered through the windows, and then, astoundingly, walked right through the house itself, contaminating what was likely the most complex crime scene in Iowa's history. They touched things, moved objects, and some even took souvenirs, like chips of blood from the axe handle. When the scene was finally secured, and a proper examination could be conducted by investigators, the full, methodical horror of the slaughter was revealed. In the master bedroom, Josiah and Sarah Moore were found. They had been bludgeoned so viciously that their faces were unrecognizable. The killer had used the blunt pole of the axe on Josiah, but had turned it around, using the sharp blade on Sarah. The ceiling above their bed was scarred from the wild, swinging blows of the axe. In the adjacent children's room, the 4 more children, Herman, Catherine, Boyd, and Paul, were found in their beds. They had all met the same fate, their small skulls crushed by the same weapon. Finally, in the downstairs guest bedroom, were the bodies of the 2 visiting Stillinger girls, Lena and Ina. It was in this room that the murder weapon, Josiah Moore's own axe, had been left behind. It had been wiped down, but not thoroughly enough to remove the bloodstains. The brutality was shocking, but it was the other details, the small, bizarre clues left behind by the killer, that elevated this case from a simple murder to a legendary, unsolvable mystery. The first and most famous clue. Every mirror and piece of reflective glass in the house had been meticulously covered with cloths and pieces of clothing. The large mirror on the dresser in the parents' room, the mirror in the guest room, even the glass on the front door. All were draped and hidden. It was a strange, ritualistic act. Was the killer superstitious, afraid of seeing their own reflection while committing the deed? Or perhaps they were afraid of the victim's spirits being trapped in the glass. Whatever the reason, it was a deliberate and chilling signature. Second, every victim's face had been covered with their bedclothes after they were killed. This suggested a strange sort of consideration, an act of covering their work. Was this a sign of remorse, or a twisted attempt to give the victims a semblance of dignity after the slaughter? Third, the doors were all locked from the inside. The killer had taken the Moore family's keys and locked the doors on their way out, leaving them behind. How did they exit without being seen? And why go to the trouble of locking the doors? Fourth, the kitchen held 2 more baffling clues. A bowl filled with bloody water was found on the kitchen table, suggesting the killer had stopped to wash their hands after the murders. And leaning against the wall, near a washstand, was a 2-pound slab of uncooked bacon, taken from the icebox. This detail has confounded investigators for over a century. It served no apparent purpose, and remains one of the case's most bizarre footnotes. Finally, the killer had searched the dresser drawers, but had not taken any money or valuables, which were left in plain sight. This was not a robbery gone wrong. This was something else. This was an act of personal rage-fueled violence, carried out with a strange, methodical calmness. The scene was a tapestry of contradictions, a puzzle that, to this day, has never been solved. Act 3. A town drowning in fear and suspicion. In the wake of the murders, the idyllic town of Villisca was plunged into a state of paranoia and terror. The National Guard was called in to maintain order as the town's citizens, now armed and fearful, saw a potential murderer in every stranger. The investigation, crippled from the start by the contaminated crime scene, quickly devolved into a chaotic mess of theories, accusations, and false leads. A host of suspects emerged, each one pulling the town further apart. The most bizarre and enduring suspect was a man named Reverend George Kelly. An itinerant, English-born preacher, Kelly was a strange man, known for his odd behavior and history of mental illness. He had attended the Children's Day service on the night of the murders and had left town on an early morning train the next day. Years later, after being arrested for sending obscene material through the mail, Kelly suddenly confessed to the Villisca murders. He provided a detailed, chilling account, claiming that a divine voice had commanded him to slay and slay utterly. However, his confession was full of inconsistencies, and during his trial, he recanted it. After 2 separate trials resulted in a hung jury and then an acquittal, he was set free, leaving the question of his guilt forever hanging in the air. Another powerful theory pointed to a conspiracy orchestrated by a prominent local figure, Iowa State Senator Frank F. Jones. Josiah Moore had worked for Jones for several years before leaving to start his own, highly successful rival company, taking significant business away from the senator. The rumor in town was that Jones was furious and that the rivalry had become deeply personal. The theory alleged that Jones had hired a professional hitman to eliminate his competitor. This hitman was believed to be a man named William Blackie Mansfield. Mansfield was a suspected serial killer, believed to be responsible for a series of eerily similar axe murders across the Midwest, including the murders of his own wife, infant child, and in-laws. There was a compelling circumstantial case against him, but a grand jury failed to indict him, citing a lack of direct evidence. The idea that one of their own, a powerful state senator, could be behind such a monstrous act was too much for many in the town to bear. The list of suspects grew. A transient named Andy Sawyer, who was allegedly overheard talking about the murders before they were public knowledge, was arrested and then released. Even Henry Lee Moore, no relation to the family, became a suspect. He was an axe murderer who had killed his own mother and grandmother just months after the Villisca crime with startling similarities. However, he had a solid alibi for the night of the Moore family murders. The failed investigations and the constant finger-pointing had a devastating effect on Villisca. The community fractured, turning neighbor against neighbor. Accusations flew, reputations were ruined, and the town was consumed by a poison of suspicion that lasted for generations. The killer had not only murdered 8 people, they had murdered the spirit of the town itself. Act 4. The Haunting. Decades passed. The suspects grew old and died, taking their secrets with them. The Villisca Axe murders officially entered the cold case files, a permanent and horrifying scar on the landscape of American crime. But the story was far from over. As the living memory of the crime faded, a new chapter began, one that moved from the realm of true crime into the realm of the paranormal. The Moore house, left standing as a grim monument to the tragedy, began to develop a reputation. People claimed it was haunted. The house was passed through several owners over the years, many of whom reported strange and inexplicable events. But it was in the 1990s, when the house was purchased and restored to its 1912 condition to be preserved as a historical site, that the stories truly took flight. It was open for tours and even overnight stays for those brave enough to spend a night with the spirits of the murdered family. It soon became known as one of the most haunted locations in the entire country. Paranormal investigators and curious tourists flocked to the small Iowa town, and they brought back chilling tales. The most common reports are the sounds of children. Visitors claim to hear the faint, disembodied voices of children crying, talking, or playing in the upstairs rooms. Some have heard the sound of a ball bouncing in an empty room, or the scraping sound of a toy being dragged across the floor. Objects are said to move on their own. Doors open and close. Lamps fall from dressers, and objects left in one spot are later found in another. Many people have captured audio recordings of what they claim are the voices of the dead, a phenomenon known as electronic voice phenomena, or EVP. On these recordings, faint voices can allegedly be heard saying things like "get out," or whispering the names of the children. The atmosphere in the house is described as heavy and oppressive, particularly in the attic and in the closet of the parents' bedroom. People report feeling sudden cold spots, being touched or pushed by unseen hands, and experiencing an overwhelming sense of sadness and despair. One man, a paranormal investigator staying overnight in 2014, was rushed to the hospital after inexplicably stabbing himself in the chest. The bizarre clues of the crime scene are re-examined through a paranormal lens. The covered mirrors, for instance. In many spiritual traditions, mirrors are believed to be portals, or devices that can trap the souls of the recently deceased. Was the killer covering them to prevent the spirits of his victims from following him, or bearing witness to his escape? The mystery of the Villisca Axe murders has transcended its origins as an unsolved crime. It has become a full-fledged American ghost story, a place where the veil between the world of the living and the world of the dead is said to be terrifyingly thin. Act 5. An American Gothic legend. Over a century later, the Villisca Axe murders remains one of America's most profound and disturbing unsolved mysteries. The case is a perfect storm of horror. The slaughter of innocents, the idyllic setting turned nightmare, and a collection of bizarre clues that seem to defy logical explanation. It has become more than just a cold case. It has become a piece of dark American folklore. Why does it still haunt us? Perhaps it is because it represents the ultimate violation of safety and sanctity. The Moore family was murdered in their own beds, in a locked house, in a town where they felt perfectly safe. It speaks to a primal fear that no matter how secure we think we are, evil can find a way inside. The gallery of suspects remains compelling but inconclusive. Was it the deranged Reverend Kelly, acting out a twisted divine command? Was it a cold, professional hitman like Blackie Mansfield, hired by a powerful business rival? Or was it the work of an unknown, wandering killer, a nameless phantom who passed through the town, committed an atrocity, and then vanished back into the darkness? We will likely never know for sure. The motive is the greatest question of all. The lack of robbery points away from a simple crime of opportunity. The sheer, overwhelming violence suggests a deep personal rage. Yet no one in the Moore family seemed to have an enemy capable of such an act. The ritualistic elements, the covered mirrors, the covered faces, the slab of bacon, suggest a killer with a disturbed and complex psychology, someone who was not just killing, but performing a kind of macabre ceremony. The little white house on 508 East 2nd Street still stands in Villisca, a silent sentinel holding the secrets of that terrible night. It is a place where history, horror, and haunting converge. The crime has passed beyond the reach of law enforcement and has been given over to the realm of ghost stories and campfire tales. It serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the most horrific monsters are not creatures of fantasy, but real people, and the darkest deeds can happen not in a haunted castle, but in a quiet, ordinary house on a quiet, ordinary street in the heart of America.